And that's basically it for the topic of market failure. So those are the main definitions that you need to understand and use. A lot of these you usually have to show through graphs and negative externalities, and you normally have to kind of put down all these different things on the graph to explain how it works. And then these are just some of the few definitions at the end which you should know how to explain. But hopefully it all makes sense now. And as always, if this video is helpful, please do leave a comment and share this with your friends at school or anyone who might be interested, and I'll continue making more of these videos. And so good luck with your work, and I'll see you in the next video. So welcome back to another video. In this video for our economics definitions series, we'll be taking a look at market failure. So this is the second chapter in year one economics. So I guess it's a good idea to start off with what actually is market failure. So market failure is usually where the free market fails to allocate goods and services efficiently, and that usually causes a net loss of social welfare. What that means is usually the whole idea of the free market is that you let the market mechanism or the price mechanism decide how to allocate your goods and services. But sometimes it might not do that in the most efficient way. And when it doesn't do it in the most efficient way, aka it fails, that's when you have market failure. So it's basically your market mechanism, price mechanism, it's not allocating goods and resources in the best way possible. And as a result, you lose some social welfare. So the next definition is negative externalities. So negative externalities comes up a lot in a lot of the different questions that you have to do. And this is where the social costs of producing or consuming a good are greater than the private costs. So this means that you will impose an external cost on third parties. So what this definition technically means is that if you consume a good, you have a private cost to yourself. But then the social cost means the cost to both yourself and to someone else. So if you were to smoke a cigarette, there's a cost to you buying the cigarette, there's a cost to your health, etc. But also because of passive smoking, people behind you or people around you will also have a loss to their own welfare. So the negative externality you can think of is when you do something, is if it has a negative effect on someone else who's not part of what you're doing, then that's a negative externality because you did something, someone else has to suffer some consequences even though they didn't want to do what you were doing. So that's a negative externality. Pollution can be another one. If a factory is polluting a river, then the people who might be using the river downstream, even though they're not the reason it's polluted, they still have to suffer the consequences. So negative externalities is quite an important one to understand. Positive externalities is just essentially the opposite thing. That's where the social benefits of producing and consuming the good are greater than the private benefits. So this is just saying that if you're doing something which benefits you, if as a result of you doing something also benefits someone else, even though they didn't do it, then that's basically a positive externality. So vaccination can be one thing. If you vaccinate a child, then someone else might not get sick in the population. So because you made the choice to get a vaccination, someone else doesn't get sick. So that's another example of a positive externality. So yeah, you basically have a external benefit on third parties. So we've talked a lot about private costs, external costs, and so on. So in this section over here, we're just kind of define what each of these mean. So what's a private cost, etc. So private cost is basically just a cost to an individual for participating in economic activity. Usually it's the price you might pay to buy something or some costs that you might incur. It could even be health costs. It doesn't have to always be in terms of money, but usually it is. And so it's just a cost to yourself. The external cost is basically the cost to someone else who's not part of what you're doing. So you can think of as a difference between the social cost, which is a cost to other people plus yourself minus your private cost. That's the external cost. So yeah, social cost we just talked about here. So it's a cost to society as a whole, so both the individual and the third parties, because someone's undertaking economic activity. Then private benefits, external benefits, and social benefits are basically just the opposite of their cost words. So private benefit is just the benefit that you have as an individual for doing a certain economic activity. And external benefit is just a benefit to a third party who's not involved in the activity. So it's just if you do something and someone else benefits from it, then they get an external benefit. And the social benefit is just a benefit to society as a whole, so the individual and third parties, because someone's done something. So the way you tend to look at these is that external cost and social cost equals to, private cost, my bad, and external cost together, that equals to social costs. And then if you add private benefits to external benefits, you get social benefits. So yeah, these two here added up give you this, and these two here added up give you that. So now that we've covered that, let's take a look at what are public goods. So public goods are basically products where an individual can consume it without reducing its availability to others. Now, what that means is that they're non-excludable and non-reverse. And essentially, if someone asks you a definition for this in your exam, make sure to include these two words. And non-exclusive and non-reverse basically just mean this part up here. So it's basically a product where if you're consuming it, then you're not reducing its availability to someone else, and you're not depriving them of the chance to actually use it. So a public good could just be like a street lamp, for example. If you're using the street lamp's light to get home, you're not not letting someone else use it as a result of it, and that's essentially what a public good is. The key thing is your way of consumption of it is not reducing how available it is to other people. So then we have something called the free rider problem, and this is where you've probably heard it quite a lot, but it's where you have a problem where people do not pay for certain goods and services, but they still get benefits from it. So I mean, there aren't too many free rider goods out there actually, or too many things that have free rider. Like you might say street lamps might, someone might not pay for it and can benefit from it, but you kind of technically pay through your taxes sometimes. But let's say someone wasn't paying their taxes and they were, using the street lamps or using the NHS, then technically that could be a free rider kind of problem. It's just usually when someone who hasn't done something gains benefits from the action. Another example might be if everyone in a society is, keeping their houses well kept, crime is low, etc., then someone who maybe isn't contributing to that might see their house prices rise as a result because everyone around him is, taking good care of society and so on, but they might not be. So they could be a free rider if they see their house price go up. So then finally, we've got some other things to look at. So symmetric information, asymmetric information. So the key thing with this one is just basically when you have two parties, it's just all to do with who has information, basically, which side has more information or do they have the same amount of information. So in symmetric information, both the buyer and the seller will have access to the same information, hence you say it's symmetric because both of them have it. But in asymmetric information, either the buyer or the seller will have more information than the other, and that can cause market failure. So quite often in a lot of transactions, like let's say you're buying a used car, then that might be asymmetric information because the guy trying to sell you the car has a lot more information on it than you do. Like he knows the ins and outs of the car, how it works. He might know if a used car is not as good as he's saying. So with asymmetric information, he might be able to persuade you to buy the car. Whereas if you had all the details on what the car really was like, if it really performed like he said, so if you had symmetric information, you might not have bought it. So a lot of people like to leverage asymmetric information to kind of convince other people to do things which they might not have if they had symmetric information.